It has not rained in 9 days. You know this because you have been watching the yard go from green to yellow to the color of old straw, and because the forecast on your phone has been saying possible showers all week and meaning it less every day. The rain barrel by the downspout is bone dry. The garden hose runs from the spigot on the side of the house, and you have been running it every evening because the things you planted need water and the sky is not giving any. You watch the water counter on your bill climb. You try not to think about what it is going to say at the end of the month. Now I want you to notice something. When you walked out this morning, there was dew on the grass. Maybe a little on the hood of your car. A spider's web out by the fence post had beads of water strung along every thread, catching the early light. You did not put that water there. It did not fall from the sky. The air made it. The air around you all night long was full of water in the form of vapor, invisible, and when it touched something cold enough, it let that water go and laid it down on whatever surface was there. The grass, the car, the web. That water came from nowhere, or rather, it came from everywhere, from the air itself, pulled out of the sky by the simple physics of a surface that got cold enough at night. The question is whether you can be intentional about it, whether you can put up a surface that is designed to catch that water instead of waiting for the dew to evaporate off your lawn by 9 in the morning. The answer is yes. It has been yes for a very long time. And the setup that does it costs about $12 to build and fits in your yard right now. My name is John Fisher. I am Amish, and I farm in Holmes County, Ohio. We do not pay a water bill, and we never have. But what I am going to show you today is not how we get water from our well or how we catch rain off the barn roof. Those are other conversations. This one is about the thing we do in the dry weeks when neither of those sources is giving us enough. I'm going to show you exactly how to build a fog and dew collector for about $12 in parts from one trip to the hardware store, explain to you the mechanism that makes it work, tell you honestly how much water you will actually get and what affects that number, and then show you the one thing most people build wrong that cuts their yield in half before they even start. Stay with me on the limitations especially. This is real, it is worth building, but how much water you get depends on where you live and what the air is doing. I would rather you build this knowing the truth and be pleased than build it with big expectations and feel cheated. Before I get into the build, I want to explain the mechanism, because once you understand why this works, the rest of the decisions make sense. There are 2 separate ways a collector like this catches water, and most guides out there treat them as one thing. They are not. The first is fog collection. Fog is just a cloud that has settled down low enough to touch the ground. It is not vapor anymore. It is actual tiny droplets of liquid water already formed, just suspended in the air. When fog rolls in and passes through a mesh, those tiny droplets hit the strands of the mesh and stick. They merge with the other droplets around them, grow heavy, and run down to the bottom. The mesh is intercepting water that is already liquid. It is like a sieve catching something that is already wet. This is the fast, dramatic kind of collection you see in the photos online where somebody is harvesting liters at a time overnight. It is real and it works beautifully, but it requires fog, and fog requires specific conditions. Coastal areas, valley bottoms at night, hilltops in certain climates. If you live somewhere that gets regular fog, your collector will pull impressive amounts. If you live somewhere that sees fog a few times a year, this part of the equation gives you a little. The second is dew collection. This is the one that works nearly everywhere. Dew forms when a surface cools below a temperature the meteorologists call the dew point. When the surface gets that cold, the air touching it cannot hold as much vapor anymore, and it releases moisture onto the surface as liquid. Your lawn does this every night because the grass blades radiate their heat upward into the open sky and cool down past the dew point. A fog collector mesh does the same thing. At night, as the sky clears and the mesh radiates its heat away, the metal or plastic threads of the mesh drop in temperature and dew forms on them. This runs down and collects. It is slower than fog collection. It is more modest, but it is far more consistent because you do not need fog. You need clear nights with a reasonable humidity level, and most places have those most of the time through the growing season. The setup I'm going to show you works on both principles at once. It does not care which one is giving water on any given night. It catches what the air offers. Here is what you need. The most important part of the whole build is the mesh. Not all mesh is equal, and this is where most people spend their $12 wrong. You want what the engineers who study this call a standard shade cloth, with a mesh density somewhere between 35 and 50% shade rating. The reason this specific density matters is the mechanism. If your mesh is too fine, the tiny droplets of water cannot pass through the holes to drain. They merge on the threads, form a film, and spread across the surface so thickly that the mesh itself starts to block the airflow. Air has to move through the mesh to keep bringing new moist air in contact with the surface. Too dense, and you have a wall, not a collector. If the mesh is too open, the surface area is too small. The droplets form, but they are too far apart and too small, and they evaporate before they get a chance to run together. 35 to 50% shade cloth is the range where the surface area is large enough to catch droplets, but the holes are large enough to let air flow through and drainage happen. You can find this cloth at any garden supply, hardware store, or farm store for about $6 or $8 for a 10-foot section. It looks like a fine black or green net. It is often sold to shade greenhouse plants in summer. That is exactly what you want. The second thing you need is a frame to hold the mesh up and face it into the wind. My son Eli built our first frame from 4 pieces of scrap lumber, just a rectangle like a window frame with the mesh stapled across it. A piece of 1x2 pine or furring strip costs almost nothing. If you have a piece of old fence picket in the shed, that works too. Size matters here, and I will explain why in a moment, but a good starter size is about 4 feet wide by 6 feet tall. Bigger is better, but you are starting with $12, so let us keep it reasonable. A 4x6 frame gives you 24 square feet of catching surface. The third thing is a collection trough at the bottom. This can be as simple as a rain gutter section cut to the width of your frame and attached beneath it, or a piece of aluminum flashing bent into a shallow V shape, or a plastic gutter section from the hardware store. Something that catches the water as it runs down the mesh and channels it into a container. Run a short piece of hose or a downspout from the trough into a bucket or a barrel below. Total cost: the mesh, the lumber, a gutter section, or a piece of aluminum flashing, a few screws. $12, maybe $15 if you have to buy everything new. Most of you have the lumber already. Here is how you put it up, and the one thing most people get wrong. You set the frame up so it faces into the prevailing wind at your location. This is the thing people skip. They set up the frame wherever it is convenient, in a protected corner where it fits nicely, and then wonder why it is not catching anything. The whole mechanism depends on air moving through the mesh. Still, air sitting on one side of a wall of mesh does almost nothing. Moving air passing through the mesh touches every thread, deposits every droplet it is carrying, and moves on so more moist air can replace it. Find out which direction the wind comes from most nights at your property. In Holmes County, here in Ohio, the nighttime air generally moves from the southwest in summer. Your location will be different. Watch your trees. Notice which way the leaves are moving in the evening. Set the frame perpendicular to that direction so the air hits it face on, not at an angle, not from behind. Face it into the wind. That is the single most important placement decision. Set it in the most open spot you have, away from buildings and trees that would break the airflow before it reaches the mesh. Elevated is better than low. The air moving across an open yard at head height carries more moisture and moves more consistently than the still air at ankle height near the ground. Set the frame on 2 posts or lean it on a simple A-frame stand. The bottom of the mesh should be close enough to the trough that water running down does not miss the collection point. The trough needs to slope. Just a degree or 2 is enough. Water that sits in a level trough evaporates. Water that flows toward a low point fills your bucket. Tilt the whole collection assembly just slightly so the captured water moves toward one end and falls into your container. Now let me tell you the depth of the mechanism for those who want to understand why this really works, because once you see it, you will understand some things about how to optimize the setup and what to expect on any given night. Water in the air as vapor is invisible. You cannot see it, you cannot feel it, but on a humid summer night in Ohio, There can be as much as 2 or 3% of the air by weight that is actually water. That vapor wants to become liquid. It is trying to find a surface cold enough to let it drop that temperature below the dew point and release. Your mesh helps by being a surface that cools efficiently at night. Metal threads cool faster than the air around them because they have low thermal mass and radiate heat upward into the open sky quickly. Plastic threads work too, but cool more slowly. When the thread temperature drops below the local dew point, tiny drops appear on the thread. They start microscopic. As more vapor touches the cold surface, the drops grow. When a drop gets large enough, gravity beats surface tension, and the drop moves down the thread toward the next thread below it. It merges. It grows larger. Eventually, it reaches the bottom of the mesh and falls into the trough. What you are doing is giving the vapor a surface to condense on that is also shaped to guide the water somewhere useful. The natural surface under your feet does the same thing, which is why the grass is wet in the morning. You are just concentrating it and directing it. The failure mode most people hit is not understanding the role of temperature difference. The bigger the gap between the surface temperature of your mesh and the dew point temperature of the air, the more water you get. This means your collector works best on clear, calm nights. Here is why. On a clear night, the mesh can radiate its heat straight up into the open sky and cool down efficiently. On a cloudy night, the clouds act like a blanket, sending some of that heat back down, and the mesh does not cool as far. Clear nights equal better yields. This also means that in very humid climates, where the dew point is already high, even a slightly cool surface will cross it and produce water. In very dry climates, where the dew point is low, the surface needs to get significantly colder before condensation starts, and your yield will be less. This is not a device that ignores the climate. It works with the climate. In a place like coastal North Carolina or the river valleys of East Tennessee, this setup on a summer night can collect a gallon or more from a 24-square-foot panel. Here in Holmes County, in a dry stretch like I described, the same panel gives you maybe a pint to a quart. That is still water you did not have. That is still something worth having. Here is the thing that trips most people when they first build one of these. They check it in the middle of the day and find almost nothing in the bucket and conclude that it does not work. Collection happens at night. The mesh needs to cool. The air temperature drops. The vapor condenses. You will find your water in the morning. Go check it at first light before the sun has been up long enough to evaporate what the night put down. That first look in the morning is the honest measure of what the night gave you. I want to tell you about the morning my father Jacob showed me something I had not noticed before. I was maybe 16. We had come through a dry week in late July, the creek down to a thin trickle, the kitchen garden looking rough. He woke me early and took me out to the back of the property where we had strung a fence row of old wire mesh along a cedar post line. He was not trying to collect water. The mesh was just there for a fence, but he showed me what was on it. Every wire strand was beaded with drops, running to the bottom wire, dripping into the grass below. He said, "Look at all the water in the air that fell on this one old fence." Then he pointed to the ground under the fence, and it was wet for 2 feet on each side, dark and soft, while the ground a few feet away was dry and dusty. The fence had been catching water out of the air and watering its own little strip of ground all summer. He said, "Water does not always come from the sky. Sometimes it comes from the air that is already right here." That morning I understood something that I have never forgotten. The water in the air is always there whether you capture it or not. The only question is whether you put up something to catch it. I want to be honest with you about what this setup will not do, because some of the videos you will find on this topic make claims that are not fair. This is not a replacement for a well. It is not a replacement for a rainwater catchment system, for a family with a real water need. This $12 panel is a supplement, not a solution. What it is good for is the kitchen garden, the bucket of water for the dog, the handful of gallons that can mean the difference between a seedling making it through a dry stretch and not making it. On a damp, foggy night, a larger panel, say 10 feet by 6 feet, can pull several gallons. On a typical clear summer night in the Midwest, your 4 by 6 panel might put half a gallon in the bucket. That half gallon over a dry week adds up to 3.5 gallons you did not take out of the well or pay the water company for. I am not telling you it will do more than that on most nights. I am telling you it will do that much, reliably, for the price of one meal out, using water that was already floating in the air around your yard. Now I want to say a word about who profits from you not knowing how to do this, because it is relevant. The bottled water industry in this country sells more than $40 billion worth of water every year. A significant portion of that is sold in dry months to people watering gardens, topping off pools, keeping livestock, filling humidifiers. There is an entire infrastructure built around you buying water. Your municipal water system charges you by the 100 cubic feet. Your water softener company sells you salt every 6 weeks. The landscape company charges you for drip irrigation installation. None of those things make any money from a mesh frame that pulls water from the air for free. I am not suggesting anyone sat down to keep this from you. No one schemed this. It is simpler than that. The old technology that costs $12 and works forever makes no one a penny after the day you build it. So it sits in the agricultural journals and the reports from researchers working in drought zones in Chile and Ethiopia and Morocco, where fog collectors have been providing drinking water to villages for decades. And it does not make its way into the hardware store how-to pamphlet or the YouTube ad for smart irrigation systems. The technology is not new. It is not unproven. It is just not profitable to sell you. There is something I want to say before I close, because this collector is a small thing, and I want you to see it for what it is, beyond just the water it brings. My grandfather Daniel used to say that independence is not a big thing you achieve all at once. It is a collection of small things you learn to do without asking permission. The fog collector is one of those small things. It does not free you from your water company, but it is one strand in a longer practice of understanding where things come from and how to catch a small amount of them without needing to call anyone, pay anyone, or be dependent on a system that sends you a bill. The man who knows how to pull water from the air is a man who will never look at a foggy morning the way he used to look at it. He will look at it and see something that is already there, already his, already waiting. A house that knows how to gather its own water, even a little of it, is more yours than a house that waits for it to be delivered. That is a small truth, but it compounds over years. Water does not only come from the tap, sometimes it comes from the air that is already right here. So here is what I want you to do. This weekend, go to the garden section of your hardware store and buy a piece of shade cloth in the 35 to 50% shade rating. Pick up a couple of 8-foot furring strips, a short piece of gutter or a piece of aluminum flashing, and a handful of screws. Total, $12 to $15. Build a simple rectangle frame, staple the mesh across it, attach the trough at the bottom, and set the whole thing up in the most open spot in your yard facing into the direction the wind comes from in the evening. Set a 5-gallon bucket under the drain point. Go to bed, wake up early, before the sun has been up an hour, and look at what is in the bucket. Whatever is there, however modest, is water that the air around your house gave you for free while you slept. Then try tilting the bottom of the mesh in slightly toward the yard side if your yield is low. Try moving it to a more open spot. Try a larger panel. Each adjustment teaches you something about the airflow and the humidity on your specific land. Tell me in the comments below what county and state you are in and what your dry season looks like. If you get regular fog, tell me that too. And if you build one of these and check it in the morning, come back and tell me what was in the bucket. The folks in the drier places need to hear from the folks in the humid ones, and the folks in the foggy coastal areas have a completely different story to tell than someone in Kansas. I read every one. Next time, since today we have been pulling water from the air around us, I am going to show you the old way we store water once we have it. The clay pot method my wife Hannah uses to keep water cool and clean through a hot week with no refrigeration and no electricity. The same technology that has kept water sweet in desert climates for thousands of years. It pairs with what I showed you today and costs almost nothing to set up. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Until then, set up your frame, face it into the wind, and remember that the knowledge that makes you less dependent on a bill and less reliant on a company has always been there. It was just never mentioned by the people whose business depends on you not knowing